When a modern capital ship takes a torpedo directly to the jaw, the story usually ends with thousands of tons of seawater rushing into the breach, the structural spine snaps under the immense weight, and the vessel plunges thousands of feet into the dark. Today, we are talking about the miracles of naval architecture and stubborn defiance of brave crewmen. These are the accounts of ships that were blown into literal halves and still refused to sink. Our first story takes us to the pitch-black, terrifying night of November 30th, 1942. The waters off Guadalcanal were already known as Iron Bottom Sound for a reason. The floor of the ocean was almost paved with the hulls of American and Japanese warships. The heavy cruiser USS Minneapolis, the proud flagship of Task Force 67, was leading a line of cruisers to intercept a Japanese transport force. The Americans had radar, they had the surprise advantage. But the Japanese had something far more lethal, the Type 93 Long-Lance torpedo. At 23:27, the night erupted. The first Long-Lance struck Minneapolis far forward, right under the forecastle. The blast was so violent that the entire bow, from the very tip of the ship back to turret 1, collapsed downward. A second torpedo smashed into her fire rooms. Aviation fuel tanks ruptured, sending a towering inferno of flame up through the decks. Look at this photograph closely. There is no bow, no keel holding the front together. The sea was pouring directly into the exposed compartments of the ship. By all the laws of physics, the Minneapolis should have sank nose first into the Pacific within minutes. To prevent the massive pressure of the ocean from tearing their internal walls apart, the captain gave a counterintuitive order: put the ship in reverse. For hours, Minneapolis crawled backward at just 3 knots, her crew fighting fires and pumping out thousands of gallons of water. They managed to sneak into a secluded bay at Tulagi. But they weren't safe yet. Japanese aircraft patrolled the skies daily. So to save their ship from being spotted and finished off, the crew turned into lumberjacks. They cut down massive palm trees and draped the entire mangled front of the warship in tropical jungle vegetation. From the air, the multi-million-dollar heavy cruiser looked like nothing more than a tiny island. The damage control parties managed to isolate the flooded forward compartments, building a makeshift bulkhead out of whatever timber and steel they could scavenge. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't seaworthy, but it allowed them to sail thousands of miles across the Pacific to Mare Island Navy Yard. Minneapolis was given a completely new nose, returned to the fight, and went on to win an amazing 17 battle stars. Our next account features a ship that didn't just survive being blown apart, it survived being executed twice, left for dead, and practically cremated. This is the story of the cargo ship turned auxiliary warship, USS Alchiba. During the brutal logistics race of the Guadalcanal campaign in November 1942, the Alchiba was sitting off the coast, packed to the brim with aviation fuel, ammunition, and combat supplies for the Marines. It was a floating powder keg. Suddenly, and out of nowhere, a wake sliced through the water. A torpedo fired from a Japanese submarine slammed directly into her forward hold. The blast was blinding, and aviation gas ignited instantly, turning the entire forward half of the ship into a raging volcano. The damage was so severe, and the flames so uncontrollable, that the captain had only one desperate option to save her from sinking into deep water. He ordered the helm hard over and intentionally ran the burning ship aground on a nearby reef. For 5 straight days, the crew fought apocalyptic fires while explosives detonated in the forward holds. Against all mathematical odds, they put the fires out. But the Japanese military wanted this ship dead. Less than 2 weeks later, while the crew was working on the grounded hull, a Japanese midget submarine sneaked past the perimeter and fired a torpedo, completely obliterating the engine room and tearing open a massive new breach in the steel. The ship was now flooded forward, destroyed aft, and resting heavily on the rocks. The U.S. Navy officially declared her a total loss and struck her from the registry. But the crew of the Alchiba didn't care what the bureaucrats in Washington thought. Salvage crews pumped out millions of gallons of water, and after months of grueling labor, they actually managed to float the gutted hull off the reef. With no operational engines of her own, the hollowed-out, twice-blasted shell of the Elchaba was towed thousands of miles across the treacherous Pacific all the way back to California. The shipyards didn't just scrap her, they completely rebuilt her from the inside out. She was recommissioned, went right back into the war, and earned a Navy unit commendation for surviving a double-death sentence that would have claimed a dozen ordinary ships. What happens when a warship is reduced to nothing more than a floating middle section? To find out, we look at the J-class destroyer HMS Javelin, commanded by none other than the legendary Captain Lord Louis Mountbatten. On November 29, 1940, Javelin led a flotilla of destroyers to engage a force of German destroyers operating in the English Channel. Mountbatten, known for his aggressive tactics, closed the distance rapidly. But the German ships were equipped with highly effective torpedoes of their own. As Javelin turned to bring her guns to bear, two torpedoes found her simultaneously. The distribution of the damage was almost comically perfect. The first torpedo blew the entire bow off. The second torpedo tore away the entire stern, including her steering gear and her propellers. Out of an original ship length of 353 feet, HMS Javelin had lost 180 feet of her structure. More than half of the ship was now resting on the floor of the channel. She was left as a floating, 170-foot island of steel, containing only the bridge, the midship guns, and the boiler rooms. She had no rudder to steer with, no propellers to move with, and her ends were open to the freezing winter sea. By every rulebook of naval design, a destroyer hull stripped of its length should have rolled over and capsized instantly due to the loss of stability. But the build quality of British yards and the tenacity of her crew kept the middle section stable. For hours, under the threat of German air attacks, British tugboats hooked lines onto this floating remnant and dragged her back to port at a miserable 3 knots. It took nearly a year of complex reconstruction to rebuild her missing halves, but HMS Javelin returned to active service, surviving the Mediterranean campaigns, the landings in Normandy, and the war in the Indian Ocean. When we look back at these incredible stories, we have to ask ourselves, was it just incredible luck, or was it something more? The truth is, it was a perfect storm of two things: redundant, over-engineered naval architecture and exceptional discipline. During the interwar years and World War I, ships were built with complex webs of watertight compartments. Designers knew that ships would take damage, so they engineered them to isolate the trauma. But those compartments are only as good as the men who operate the valves, shore up the collapsing walls, and choose to stay with a burning, broken hull when every instinct tells them to jump overboard. The next time you look at a photo of a warship missing a massive section of its structure, remember that you aren't just looking at a picture of destruction. You are looking at a monument to human ingenuity, brilliant engineering, and a crew that looked at a ship broken clean in half and said, "We are sailing this home anyway." If you want to see more hidden stories of naval history and the incredible engineering that survived the world's greatest conflicts, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below letting me know which of these ships you think had the most miraculous escape.